Until the latter years of the 16th century, the corpses of the fallen were mostly left unclaimed on the blood-soaked soil where they fell. But this changed when it became evident that the heretic legions were expending great effort to claim the bodies of those sworn to the church. The Synod of Strategic Prophecy concluded that they were being transported to hell for purposes too hideous to contemplate, and thus the Council of Saints was petitioned to send one of the legendary paladins into hell itself to discover what unholy perversions were afoot. It is said that Paladin Garin fought his way down through the inferno to the very gates of this, before returning to the Castle San Angelo to report his findings. What he said has never been recorded, but soon after, the Demetrian Order of Reclamation was instituted to recover as many bodies as possible from the front lines. These bodies were transported along what became known as corpse rails, thanks to the viscous trails of bodily fluids that indicated the passing of such deathly rolling stock. Given the ferocity of the fighting, the smaller depots were soon overwhelmed, and a far larger structure was constructed in 1809 to house and process the dead, the Domus Demetrius. Known colloquially as the Body Barn, it is a vast, grimly industrial structure constructed over the ruins of an ancient fortress of the Templar Knights in the Amanus Mountains, which in turn had been built upon a Byzantine fortress that had been razed by the great Seljuk Empire prior to the opening of the Jerusalem Hellgate. The Domus Demetrius is a sprawling complex of colossal iron-framed structures filled with corpse cranes, row upon row of soaring embalming silos, and vast storage bays of coffins and body bags. When the bodies of the fallen arrive, they enter via the great exenarthex, which contains the towering Ciborium Demetrius, a column structure said to contain the earthly remains of Saint Demetrius, one of the many martial saints who watch over fallen soldiers. A perpetual rain drizzles from the underside of the Ciborium. It may just be powerful disinfecting solutions, but the potent reek of myrrh leads many to believe it is the body of the saint purifying those who pass beneath him in preparation for their onward journey to heaven. Within the structure, the fallen are treated with great reverence by the Demetrian monks, who recite the words of the Corpus Benedictionis to render them unusable by hell. When the bodies complete their purifying journey, they are shipped out to the corpse caves of Crete in rusted hulks that are frequently sunk before reaching their destination. In recent years, as the war against hell has intensified, the resources needed to maintain the Domus Demetrius have largely been diverted elsewhere. Although the corpse rails still run, bringing a never-ending supply of the dead, the ability of the monks to process them has fallen sharply, to the point where the growing mounds of corpses are like unto mountains themselves, the largest of which press against the structure's roof, many hundreds of yards above the blood-slick tiles. Rumours persist that voracious packs of carrion feeders have penetrated the forgotten undercrofts of the ancient ruins upon which the facility was built, tunneling up into the heart of the corpse mountains to slowly devour the fallen from within. The Demetrian monks vehemently deny this, pointing to the immovable iron doors bearing archaic sigils of the Sultanate that seal the catacombs. What lies beyond these portals is unknown, but none stationed here are in any hurry to find out. Alrighty, so the Domus Demetrius, part of the carcass front, one of the points of interest, the POIs, the landmarks that we'll be fighting over the course of the campaign. The lore tells us that until the 16th century, the corpses of the fallen were mostly left where they were after battles. What's very interesting is how the heretics really wanted the bodies of the faithful and seemed willing to spend big to get what is essentially a limited resource. This to me is the heart of the world-building section of the lore, and points at really, really interesting things far beyond the scope of just the existence of the Domus Demetrius and why it was created in the first place. So, There's something of a common theme for Hell and Trench Crusade who don't see to truly value much, frankly, that mankind would value. They don't value bodies or personal power or resources, because to them, the war is effectively infinite. They're not on a timer here. The mere existence of the war is ultimately a positive for Hell. So this idea that they want to extend it rather than truly win it makes a lot of sense, outside of complex interpolitics of Hell itself, which seems to demand that somebody be able to claim some kind of victories as a social strength, I guess, within their bullshitty Hell circles. So Hell wanted faithful bodies, but we don't really know for how long that was an edict. Like, when did this actually become a big deal, and how long did it take for the church to catch on to it? We're not sure, or what specific bodies they wanted. It just says, sworn to the church. And that implies, to me at least, that the simple innocent victims or faithful people are not enough. There needs to be some kind of promise made with the strength of faith, and that has value in some way to Hell. We know they value strength of faith through things like the Goetic warlocks and things of that nature. We know that they can take these things and they can twist it and distort it and break it. That's what they like to do. The stronger your faith, the more of an interesting target you are for these demons and these monsters and these princes of Hell. So we also get new Paladin information about Garin. Garin is a French surname that means spear or protector, the latter of which clearly covers his role towards mankind, and perhaps the former gives us a hint as to the weapon that he uses. I think it would be very cool to have a spear-armed paladin stomping around the place. The theme of the paladins also continues, as Garin was indeed a member of Charlemagne's court. At this point, it seems more likely that whomever was running the paladin program and developing these divine warriors was likely French themselves, or else they just felt that naming the paladins maybe after something like the apostles was a little bit too much on the nose. Now, we also have a new power ceiling for the paladins, as Garin makes it all the way to the gates of Dis, an impressive feat in itself, but even more impressive when you consider that he made it back. We've had paladins beat a hegemon, close a Hellgate, fight off a demon army and all the rest of it, and now fight Hell, where we can assume Hell would actually be its strongest and able to raise its most powerful forces, which is right outside the main city of the court of the seven-headed serpent itself. We kind of got to move our power scaling of the paladins a little with this one, and it provides yet more balance to proceedings. Let me explain. People get a little hung up, I think too hung up, on the minutiae. Sometimes they're almost looking for ways to rob the fun for themselves. And one of the things that people get really fucking hung up on is the progress that they feel Hell should have made, how much impact they think Hell should have had on Earth. But I've rarely seen it brought up in those same conversations when people talking about the Paladins and what they're doing to Hell in return. It's an interesting balancing act that people seem readily willing to believe and dive into in most media, where you've got a limited, extremely powerful force versus an effectively infinite weak-ass force. And I just feel like if we're going to talk about world state and have those conversations, I'd like to see them had by people who knew enough about the fucking game to remember that the Paladins exist when they're doing it. So yeah, take that as you will. So the Paladins, which were always known to be very powerful, are arguably even more powerful than many of us may have considered. Let's take a leap of logic here, because that's mostly what we do in my videos. Garin isn't just down in Hell beating fucking ass. He's getting information. We're told he fought his way there, not that he was a spy. So it seems likely that he fought, beat, and probably tortured information from something that was both powerful enough to have a chance against him, which is why it was fighting him in the first place, and well placed enough in Hell's society and the structure of this to know what was actually happening with the corpses the implication is there that that thing was super powerful and that Garin handled it and came home. As I said, homie is just shit your fucking pants powerful. Whatever he learns, which is never recorded, and there's also a kind of a fun implication there that the inevitable result of not recording it is that everyone who knows it will die, but Garin will always know it. And should Garin decide, or the church decide, or the Council of Saints decide that it needs to be reiterated, that Garin can be believed. It implies just the highest level of faith in the Paladins and their individuality, their inability to be corrupted. And I find that quite fun and interesting. But anyway, whatever it is that Garin tells them, it absolutely puts the bricks up the Synod and the Council of Saints, and a special order is formed with the sole purpose of recovering as many bodies as possible. So the problem here seems to be that volume is now suddenly a target. They don't know entirely what it is about the bodies that Hell wants. Or else they know exactly what Hell wants, and it's literally volume. We don't know, one way or the other. All we know is they want to bring back as many bodies as they possibly can. So Hell is either hoovering up bodies, and there's a refinement process to get to the thing that they want, or there's an exclusion process where 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 bodies is actually useful to them, or everybody has potential value. We just can't know with the level of data revealed in the lore. Either way, the church wants the newly dead removed from the field, as they have finally realized that the nature of the war is inherently advantageous to Hell. War makes bodies, Hell wants bodies, end of story. The lore later mentions Saint Demetrius, and we can have some fun here too. Saint Demetrius was a saint of Thessaloniki, a very important Orthodox military saint and a saint of soldiers. This makes a lot of sense, as a huge amount of soldiers will die in a war, and the Church in Trench Crusade is essentially, at this point in history, a massive military operation, almost built on the skeleton of the religious operation beneath that. The religious operation at this point in time is subservient in a way to the military one, and exists to support it and to back it up and to justify it in every way. Hugely entrenched in a fight against literal demons from actual hell, that just makes a huge amount of sense. But there's also some fun that we can be had if we want to read into the lore in another way. The order is called the Demetrian Order of Reclamation. And you can just look at Saint Demetrius and think, oh yeah, Saint Demetrius, Demetrian, that makes sense. Or you can consider the fact that there was actually also a Saint Demetrian. Saint Demetrian was a Cypriot saint, and he might give us some clues as to what Hell are doing. I wouldn't necessarily put it past the church to kind of hide what it is that they're doing in plain sight to a degree. Demetrian was venerated for convincing the Saracens to release some Christian slaves that they had later in his life. He didn't have to fight them. He didn't have to defeat them. He just talked them into it. That's pretty frickin' hardcore in its own way. He's considered a patron saint of prisoners, or just the concept of captivity or enslavement in general. Bodies were being brought in and processed and then disposed of, but demand was like way too high for what they had set up. So our Domus Demetrius was built in 1809. I'm assuming construction started much earlier and building was finalized in 1809. Domus essentially just means house, right? I think it's Roman. So there's nothing too much to read into that. It would seem the Demetrian Order of Reclamation were basically big into work from home. We see mention of a great exenarthex, which is the outermost vestibule or covered porch or portico of a church, and it lets us know that in design and function, the Domus Demetrius is built essentially to be a huge industrial scale church. The part of the building the corpses end up in is beneath something called a ciborium, which is a sacred chalice-like vessel with a conical lid used in the Catholic Church to store consecrated hosts in the tabernacle and distribute Holy Communion. Anyone who's ever gone to church in a Catholic church will know what a ciborium is. You may just have not known what a ciborium was called. We know that the church in Trench Crusade has an odd attitude towards communion as a concept, quite literally using the body and blood of Metachrist. So perhaps this post-mortem communion concept is actually literal. Maybe it really is a mix of holy ointments and unguents and tinctures distilled through the bones of a saint while invoking the power of another saint that keeps these bodies safe from whatever the designs of hell are. Now, more interesting stuff. We are told that the monks used the words of the Corpus Benedictionis to render the bodies unusable by hell. These are usually given via the use of the very body of Christ itself, in the Catholic Church way, as in a consecrated host, contained within a monstrance, not in the Trench Crusade way, which is whatever wild shit they come up with. The invocation kind of hints that whatever it is that hell wants, it is potentially connected to a direct link that particular person who has sworn to the church has with Christ himself. I do not feel that what is being used here is Metachrist's flesh, as the lore has normally been pretty clear when Metachrists were involved and has largely drawn a good line between the Metachrist concepts and actual Christ within the Catholic, Roman, religious Christian structure that exists within Trench Crusade. We know that once this process is over, the respect for the dead kind of ends with it. That's a big read, but it's mostly hinted there. Yes, they do have embalming and all the rest of it. Whatever is left there is essentially kind of meat and has little value. Like, they still want to be as respectful as they can, but the rush is over, if that makes sense. We know it's been sent off on ships that people were reasonably sure had a high percentage chance of sinking, almost certainly meaning heretics could take the corpses if they wanted them at that point, or simply stacked up in the body barn itself, where they become food for hungry carrion feeders. So if they're willing to send off the corpses on a ship that they think is going to sink, it seems likely, shall we say, that they consider those corpses to have no further value outside of potential strategic ones. We know that the heretic legions have a strong presence in the Mediterranean, so this would be akin to having a bit of a lotto going. Every couple of ships has a corpse pile, every couple of ships has something more important, and it's a good distraction, basically, for the heretics. They're willing to take the losses of the ships because the ships contain nothing of value. There's also kind of an interesting throwback to when the Altar of Leviathan lore came out and they pulled back the sea to reveal lots of uneaten corpses or partially eaten corpses, and maybe these corpses have been inadvertently feeding Leviathan as well. They don't even know it. That would be kind of interesting and fun. But yeah, the implication is that something weird and funky might be kicking off in the corpse tunnels, but nobody seems to be eager to discover what that might be. And we get another mention of cooperation between the Sultanate and the Church, which by now is an almost consistent thing, as there are Sultanate sigils on the door that seal off the catacombs. But I feel, if I'm honest, that's kind of an overplayed connection at this point in time without giving us some kind of further depth to it, other than, the Church is up to something weird and there's Sultanate sigils. Someone saw an alchemist. It's kind of overplayed. Give us some meat on that particular bone at this point in time. As far as lore goes, overall it's a very interesting and evocative lore drop, but ultimately, like much of Trench Crusade's lore, there's just more questions than answers. The biggest of which, of course, is what hell actually wants with these goddamn bodies. So, let me posit a theory. I'm drawn to the belief that hell can use the bodies almost as an anchor and pull a soul back into the body if the connection between the oath that the person made and their soul is strong enough. We know that souls can leave heaven because penitent martyrs exist. And we also know that once a mechanic exists within the world of Trench Crusade, that it can be exploited by people who can figure out how to reverse engineer it. The tools and the methods of God's own creation are essentially hard-baked into the universe, and if things and monsters and people and creatures can figure out how to access them, they can pull levers and push buttons and kind of do whatever they want until shit explodes and kills them. We also know that Hell has done this already, developing cannon rounds that undo creation itself, which is something we learned about in the Prussian lore. So it's perhaps not a huge stretch to think that they can figure out that penitent martyr mechanic and reverse engineer it for themselves, pulling occasional souls, or potentially even a lot of souls, out of heaven, giving themselves goetic torture batteries, giving themselves whatever, I don't know, potentially gaining data and information about their ultimate enemy, or costing the Holy Host a resource of what could be their ultimate goal, which must surely be a secondary war on heaven. Hell is simply not that interested in Earth other than using it to set up a war on heaven. Of that, I'm quite convinced. It's something of a stretch overall, I get it, but given how many resources the church was willing to throw into this effort and protect all this stuff and the enormous scale of it, we know that whatever is happening is likely super impactful to the war. Now, as always, I'm incredibly interested to hear your theories in the comment section below. Sound off and let me know what you think Hell is up to with those corpses. And keep it PG, you sickos. That's it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check the description below for some links. You'll have one to Creature Crusade and you'll have one to my cool dice. If you want to buy something nice for yourself, feel free. That's it. Like the video only if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, but only if you actually like what I do. And have a great day. Goodbye.